hour. So new research published today estimates that rich countries must end oil and gas production entirely by 2034. If I'm doing my math right, that's 12 years from now, in order to give the world a 50-50 chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the close of the century. This came from the UK-based Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research. What does this mean? How could this be done? What is the state of fossil fuel extraction around the world right now, and where do we go with this? What do we do with this? Collin Rees is on the line with us. He's a senior campaigner with Oil Change International and Oil Change US. Priceofoil.org is the website. Collin Rees, R-E-E-S, is his Twitter handle, or at Price of Oil. Collin, great to have you again. Tell us about this report and what it, first of all, what it tells us, and secondly, what it means we need to be doing.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's great to be here. And I think you laid it out pretty well. It tells us that we are not on track to meet our climate goals, essentially, in terms of phasing out extraction. And it specifically, what this one tells us is that in order to keep this process as equitable as possible, to make sure that we have a just transition for as many people as possible, rich countries need to act first and fastest to phase out fossil fuel extraction as well as fossil fuel use.
Is that because rich countries are in a better position to do so? They can afford things like solar panels and windmills, or is it because rich countries are the largest consumers and producers of fossil fuels, or both?
It's both of those things, yeah. So kind of two pieces there. One, rich countries are better positioned to do this. They are by definition richer, so they have more resources for this transition. Not only do they need to be phasing out their own, but they need to be sending a lot of aid, grants, assistance to other countries to help them phase out as well. And then the second piece is that we are actually not in a rich country like the United States. We're not nearly as dependent on fossil fuels for the economy as many countries. You look at a country in the global south, a country like Angola in Africa, we also need to phase out extraction in Angola, but Angola right now gets a large percentage of its country's entire GDP from fossil fuel extraction. That's not true in the US, despite what big oil would have you believe. Fossil fuels are a vanishingly small part of our economy. We absolutely need to take care of the workers and the people who are caught up in that small piece, but it's not a huge sector of our business, and it's not something that we're going to have huge disruption from phasing out.
It seems to me, Collin, that the idea of ending fossil fuel extraction altogether in the United States, for example, one of the largest producers of fossil fuels in the world, by 2034, in 12 years, has a zero probability of happening. Can you speak to that?
I think it's pretty low. I think what we've also seen is that when politics shift, they can shift quickly. We know that we can mobilize very quickly. We've seen that in times of war in the past. We're seeing that in relation to the crisis in Ukraine and Russia's invasion at the moment. This is something where really it's a question of political will. 12 years is more than enough time from a physical standpoint to make sure that we wind down this infrastructure. The key piece that does need to happen almost immediately is to stop building out new infrastructure, to stop drilling new wells, to stop pouring more fossil fuel subsidies and public money into new projects. That's what the industry is pushing right now, what big oil and gas are pushing for. And so that's the biggest thing to resist in this moment, is stopping the expansion. If we actually just let extraction in all current wells and everything they're already drilling, if we let that phase out naturally, if we kind of used up all the oil in those wells, et cetera, I think we'd still have to shut it down just a little bit early, but it would actually align relatively well with that path line over the next 12 years.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert on this, that most of our oil consumption in the United States is going to home heating, building heating, and transportation. And those are things that are very amenable to electrification, between heat pumps and electric vehicles. And that if we really wanted to do this, we'd need to throw like wartime resources into it. A couple of $1 trillion, just thrown in right now, spent over the next 12 years, might move us in that direction. First of all, is that the level of response that we would need, and have I correctly identified a target area for it? And secondly, the Biden administration proposed $500 billion $500 billion in their Build Back Better legislation to move us in this direction. And it got defeated by every Republican in the United States Senate, plus Kyrsten Sinema, plus Joe Manchin, these two sellout Democrats. Where do we go from here? There's
great
a lot
questions
in there,
all
I'm
around.
sorry.
Have some answers. No, great questions, Tom. This is something, you're absolutely right. Buildings and our homes and transportation, our vehicle system for the most part, are indeed the majority of our oil consumption, a lot of our fossil fuel use. And as you say, they can be very easily electrified. This is going to require a massive investment. I don't have figures around, but that sounds about right. I mean, I think hundreds of billions up to trillions of dollars in this next critical period. Every year that we wait, it gets sort of exponentially more difficult. So that's why we think it's such an incredibly important moment for President Biden to be seizing the moment. We do need congressional action. Hopefully, the current energy crisis spurs a bit of congressional action, but there's also a lot that Biden can do on his own and to use his executive powers. There's the Defense Production Act. He can mobilize the entire resources of the federal government towards building out clean energy, towards technology, towards electric vehicle technology and weatherization and home efficiency technology.
How does he do that without funds being allocated by Congress?
Yeah, so you have government procurement budgets, which is several hundred, like tens of billions of dollars a year that he actually does have at his disposal here, right. And then he needs to request more from Congress. So you can get a jump start on this. You can start to shift existing manufacturing, is a lot of what it is, and then hopefully the market picks it up and we can kind of mobilize across the economy. But that initial sort of spark and leadership is what we need from the Biden administration right now, as well as, of course, more action from Congress, as you mentioned. Fossil fuel industry has bought out a lot of our current Congress on both sides of the aisle in some cases. I think we need tremendous public pressure, and we also need new members of Congress. We need to make sure that the Republicans don't get control in November, and that's definitely one of the things that needs to happen.
We're talking with Collin Rees, a senior campaigner with Oil Change International and Oil Change US, priceofoil.org. Collin, a few years back, I was with a film crew in Norway. We were working on a movie called Ice on Fire that Leo DiCaprio put together. And we were talking with a whole bunch of Norwegian scientists and Norwegian politicians, about the situation. And the one thing that seemed to make them a little uncomfortable when I brought it up was the discussion of the fact that, a lot of Norway's wealth, in fact, arguably the majority of Norway's wealth, comes from their offshore oil platforms. I mean, they've got huge oil reserves, and they've built up this huge sovereign wealth fund. And they're a wealthy country too, relatively speaking. I mean, it's a small population, but a wealthy population. How are the other countries of the world that are oil producers, and I don't know, what other countries that are democracies produce oil at that level? How are they responding to this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can talk about whether you consider the U.S. a democracy, but we've seen differing mobilizations, but a lot of people responding in, I think, positive ways so far. We've seen really positive signs from Germany, in Europe, and actually pretty positive signs from the Biden administration, resisting big oil's call for massive investment, continued and expansion of drill baby drill, like that sort of narrative. Mm-hmm. I think one point I want to make really quickly, Tom, here is that we talk a lot about investment in renewables. Absolutely, we need that. But I think it's telling that we don't actually talk about investment in fossil fuels the same way. We are pouring tens of billions of dollars a year, hundreds of billions of dollars a year at the global level from advanced economies into propping up the fossil fuel industry, into destroying the planet and lining the pockets of big oil CEOs. A lot of what needed is just to shift those subsidies into the renewable sector. Absolutely, it's investment in subsidies, but we are currently doing it at a very large scale. We're just doing it for the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, I understand the worldwide, the subsidies to the fossil fuel industry run around $600 billion a year. It's over $100 billion a year in the United States. Are those numbers more or less right?
Yeah, it depends on exactly how you count them there, but somewhere between tens of billions and hundreds of billions in the U.S.
And not to mention, the entire U.S. Navy protecting shipping lines and things like that. There's a lot to it. Priceofoil.org is the website. Collin Rees, the senior campaigner with Oil Change International, at Collin Rees on Twitter or at Price of Oil. Collin, thanks for dropping by.
Thanks for having me, Tom. It's great to talk.
Thank you. Back at you. Good talking with you, too.